The dog appeared to be solely for emotional support, but when the child performed a quiet signal, the dog revealed a truth that had remained unspoken. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio, felt overwhelmingly large for her. 8-year-old Tanya Ellison sat upright in her chair, her feet dangling above the floor, holding the leash of her golden retriever, Milo, firmly in her hands. Her braids were neatly done, and her pink barrettes made a quiet clicking sound with any head movement. She spoke little, showed no signs of nervousness, simply remained still and observant, appearing remarkably composed for a child in a room filled with unfamiliar faces, awaiting a discussion of subject no child should need to comprehend. Beside her, Milo remained motionless as well. He sat close, his eyes partially closed, his comforting presence against her leg. Many assumed the dog's purpose was to ease her anxiety and provide a sense of security within the imposing environment. And while that was a contributing factor, there was a deeper significance, far more than met the eye. From a bench, Judge Mark Halbard looked down. He was in his 60s, his gray hair thinning and his glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. Throughout his career, he had presided over numerous cases, gang violence, difficult family court proceedings, and even widely publicized trials. However, something about this young girl held his complete attention. Perhaps it was the calm focus in her eyes, or perhaps it was the dog, or maybe it was the fact that not a single person in the courtroom, even the defense attorney, was able to elicit a reaction from her. The room held a considerable number of people, enough that quiet murmurs occasionally arose as someone moved closer to whisper. Seated on the left was the defendant, Russell Banning, a man in his late 40s with short hair, a pressed shirt, and his hands carefully placed in his lap. His lawyer repeatedly tapped a pen against the table, anticipating the cross-examination. Tanya had not yet glanced at Russell. Kendra Ellison, her mother, was seated 2 rows back, quietly holding a tissue in one hand and a cross necklace in the other. She hadn't uttered a word since entering the building, simply keeping her gaze fixed on her daughter, hoping the moment would quickly pass. She feared it wouldn't. Judge Halbard then cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ellison, are you ready?" Tanya glanced at her court-appointed therapist, who offered a slight nod from the front bench. She did not return the smile, only offered a single nod. "Yes, Your Honor," the therapist responded on her behalf. "She is ready." The judge nodded briefly and turned to the bailiff. "Bring the witness." A door opened to the side, and 2 officers entered. The man accused of changing Tanya's life walked deliberately to the stand, attempting to appear calm, but his eyes repeatedly darted toward Milo, and Milo, who had been entirely relaxed until that moment, raised his head. Tanya didn't react, though her hold on the leash became a little firmer. No one observed it. The prosecutor rose, straightened her jacket, and started her questioning. "Mr. Banning, can you state where you were on the night of August 14th? Russell moved closer to the microphone. "At home, watching TV. "Alone?" "Yes." "And do you expect us to simply accept that?" He relaxed against the chair. "I'm being truthful." From the visitor's area, Kendra's hand squeezed the tissue once more. Tanya avoided his gaze, yet her breathing altered a delicate, regulated rhythm, as if deliberately cultivating composure. The interrogation continued, initially focusing on establishing sequences of events. Then, the photographs were presented, images that should never be displayed in a courtroom. Tanya averted her eyes. Milo moved nearer to her. The atmosphere in the room diminished. The weight of the moment was palpable, not from the spoken words, but from their absence. Russell subtly adjusted his position. He asserted that her account was fabricated, interrupting the prosecutor's subsequent inquiry. "That dog," he commented, "is simply trained to respond. This entire situation is a fabrication." At that moment, Tanya deliberately raised her hand, positioning it behind her back. She then tapped her fingers twice, gently. The movement was subtle, barely perceptible. A missed blink would have meant overlooking it entirely. Milo's ears immediately rose. However, none of the individuals present anticipated what he would do next. Approximately 2 months prior to the court proceedings, Tanya was seated on a folding chair in her aunt's backyard in Decatur, Georgia, observing Milo pursue a red tennis ball across the lawn. The sun was beginning its descent, bathing the surroundings in a golden hue. She held the ball in her hand, but refrained from throwing it. Not yet. Her aunt, Carla Newsom, stood nearby with her arms crossed, a gentle smile gracing her features. Carla was resilient. A retired canine handler, she had previously worked in narcotics in Dallas before relocating closer to family. Around Tanya, that rigidity eased. Carla knelt beside her and met her gaze. "Are you certain you want to do this, dear?" she asked. "We don't have to if you're not ready." Tanya didn't respond immediately. She looked at Milo again, now lying on his back in the grass, tail thumping. Then she looked back at her aunt. "I don't want him to look at me," she said quietly. Carla nodded. "Then we'll teach Milo how to watch for you." It started gradually with simple games. Carla would often sit on the opposite side of the yard with a companion, role-playing as if they didn't know each other. If Tanya tapped her left shoe one time, Milo would remain still. If she tapped twice behind her back, Milo was trained to move and position himself between her and the person in front of her. This required consistent effort. Each day following school, and every weekend. Tanya was reserved, but she demonstrated a strong focus. Milo learned rapidly. He possessed a calm demeanor, intelligence, and above all, unwavering loyalty. Whenever he noticed Tanya exhibiting tension, he would instinctively move nearer. A strong bond was forming between them, a quiet and specialized team with a shared, unspoken mission. Carla observed them from the porch, occasionally recording observations, and, at other times, allowing them undisturbed time. On one evening following their work, Carla offered Tanya a bottle of water and sat close to her. "You need to understand that in court they may question your account," she stated cautiously. "Adults often feel anxious. They resist being proven incorrect." Tanya averted her gaze. "What if I make a mistake?" Carla reassured her. "You won't. And should you become overwhelmed, that's why Milo is present." He intended for them to recall his perspective. A moment of stillness followed. Then, an unusual inquiry from Tanya arose. "Do you believe he recalls what he inflicted upon me?" Carla remained silent. She preferred not to deceive. Therefore, she responded, "Perhaps not as you do, but individuals like him retain enough to be apprehensive of the truth." That evening, Kendra arrived to collect Tanya. Her gaze was weary, posture slumped. Carla drew her away before she re-entered the vehicle. "She possesses greater resilience than appears," Carla murmured. "Ensure she isn't bearing this burden by herself. When a moment arrives, meet that man directly." Kendra acknowledged, though her lips shook. Prior to their departure, Tanya returned and embraced Carla. "Thank you," she whispered against her shirt. Carla held her a little longer than normal. The day preceding the court appearance, they conducted one final meeting. Carla wore an old hoodie and mirrored sunglasses, attempting to replicate the courtroom environment. She even rehearsed a few assertive phrases she envisioned a lawyer might use. It wasn't ideal, but it provided assistance. Tanya signaled Milo. Milo positioned himself between her and Carla, remaining steadfast, vigilant, unwavering. Carla felt a constriction in her throat. "Okay," she stated, her voice softer than normal. It was one thing to be prepared, and another entirely to witness it unfold in actuality. Back in that courtroom in Toledo, Tanya remained perfectly still. Milo, now attentive, hadn't moved since she gave the double tap. Russell Banning observed a change in his posture, moving from relaxed to protective. His head rose, his chest moved forward, and his eyes focused intently on the man seated across the room. He subtly leaned away, holding the witness stand's edge. His expression grew strained, though he attempted to mask it with a forced smile. The gesture was not returned, neither by the jury, nor by the judge, nor even by his own attorney, who briefly looked at the dog with a worried twitch in his jaw. Andrea Selden, the prosecutor, paused briefly before resuming. "Mr. Banning, you previously testified that you were by yourself on August 14th. There were no witnesses and no communication records like phone calls or text messages. Is that still your account?" Russell moved his chair. That is what I stated, yes. Andrea approached him. You also affirmed that you had never encountered the minor involved in this case, correct? His gaze momentarily moved towards Tanya. Correct. I'm not familiar with her. Never spoken to her? No. Never visited her school? I said no. The atmosphere in the room became more subdued. The quiet rustling of papers had ceased. Every gaze was fixed on Tanya. She remained looking down, but Milo hadn't diverted his eyes from Russell. Not once. Judge Halberd leaned forward a little. Andrea turned to Tanya, her voice softening. Tanya, do you feel safe right now? Tanya didn't speak. Instead, she reached down and touched Milo's back. He didn't move, but the growl was so quiet, it almost sounded like a tremor. Just enough to be heard. Enough to shatter the silence. Russell blinked. I want to be clear, Andrea stated, maintaining a calm tone. The dog had been specifically trained for her protection, under the direction of a certified canine handler. He is not reacting to anxiety, but to behavior. Gerald Lasky, the defense attorney, abruptly stood. Objection. This is speculative. Judge Halberd raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Lasky. You will have your opportunity. Gerald resumed his seat, appearing unassured. Andrea approached the bench and picked up a small folder. Pursuant to the court's approval, I would like to present a short video documenting Tanya's therapy sessions. Permission granted, the judge stated. The screen descended behind the witness stand. A video commenced playing. It depicted Tanya in her aunt's backyard, peacefully walking with Milo. Carla appeared in the frame, portraying different scenarios. One tap, Milo remained by her side. Two taps. He advanced, his demeanor shifting similarly to how it had been in court. Following the video's conclusion, a significant silence ensued. Judge Halberd then addressed Russell directly. I have presided over many trials. I have encountered numerous courtroom dogs, therapy animals, and trained service animals. However, I have never witnessed an animal react with such immediate instinct. Russell attempted to speak, but remained silent. Tanya then raised her gaze, deliberately and quietly. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle. He does not speak loudly. He only whispers. Andrea turned towards her with kindness. Who, dear? Tanya indicated the man on the stand. Him. A profound silence filled the courtroom. Russell rose quickly. This is a fabrication. Are you allowing a child and a dog to determine my fate? Milo advanced, his growl intensifying. The bailiff intervened swiftly. Sir, please be seated. However, Russell remained standing. He increased his volume. This isn't factual material. It's maneuvering, Milo stated, with a single distinct bark. The judge struck his gavel. Sufficient. Any further disruptions, and you will be ejected from this courtroom. Russell retreated to his chair, his face ashen. He mumbled something quietly, but it was inaudible. The jury observed intently, motionless. Tanya leaned back in her chair, her hand still on Milo's back. She remained silent. However, the truth was no longer concealed within the evidence or legal language. It was now plainly visible to all. One could sense the gravity of the situation. It wasn't a boisterous moment. It wasn't theatrical. It was silent, as if the atmosphere in the courtroom had been suddenly removed. Judge Halbert straightened his glasses and looked toward the bailiff. Let's take a 5-minute recess. He addressed the jurors. Please remain seated. The gavel struck the desk, yet there was no movement. There was no whispering, no throat clearing, only silence. Milo stood motionless, positioned before Tanya, gazing intently at Russell Banning as if he possessed prior knowledge of the outcome. Carla, positioned behind the barrier, made eye contact with her niece. She offered a slight nod, not to influence her, but to signal her presence. Weeks earlier, she had explained to Tanya that you don't need to be loud to anyone. The truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it simply observes. That's what Milo was doing currently, observing, remaining still. Across the room, Russell was falling apart. He pulled at his collar, adjusted his posture, and spoke quietly to his attorney. His voice had changed, now more pointed and uncertain. The composed demeanor he's arrived with was gone, replaced by a noticeable unease. It was obvious to everyone. Your Honor, Andrea said softly, easing the strain. Could the child please stay seated here with her support animal during the break? The judge nodded. She may remain seated as long as she is comfortable. Gerald Lasky, still red-faced, leaned toward Russell, whispering intensely. But his client appeared to be sweating now. Milo hadn't moved. He didn't bark again. He didn't growl again. He didn't need to. The prosecutor approached Carla close to the bench. Was that signal scheduled for today? Carla didn't blink. It was always a last resort. She had never used it until now. Andrea nodded slowly. He must have triggered it without even knowing. She knew what to look for, Carla said. He must have done it before. Back at the bench, Judge Halberd reviewed the footage again quietly on his monitor. His lips tightened. He'd been on the bench long enough to know that not all evidence fits neatly into paper or testimony. Sometimes it walks on four legs and growls when a child is too afraid to speak. Following the recess, the proceedings restarted as if no interruption had occurred. However, a change was palpable. Your Honor, Andrea stated, rising to her feet, with your permission, I would like to recall Detective Lorna Morales to the stand for a brief clarification. Proceed, the judge responded. Detective Morales approached, her boots making a quiet clicking sound on the tile. She had been involved in the investigation from the beginning, when the available evidence consisted of a nebulous assertion and a child hesitant to articulate their account. Earlier, her statement had been concise. Andrea presented her with a printed photograph. Detective, is this familiar to you? Morales examined the image. It depicted Russell Banning at an elementary school field day, Tanya's school. He was not an employee. He was not a parent. He was simply a guest volunteer coordinated through a now-defunct mentorship program. Was this man permitted access to the children without supervision during the event? Andrea inquired. No, Morales stated directly. He was not. And was he discovered in a classroom alone with a student? Yes, Tanya Ellison. There it was. That was the moment Milo shifted again. His ears twitched. His body leaned forward just slightly, defensively again. Every juror's eyes followed that subtle movement. Andrea turned to the jury. You observe the video. You observe the training. You observe the dog's instinct. Now you see why Russell stood up again. This is absurd. This is emotional manipulation. The bailiff took a step forward. Judge Halberd's voice rose. Mr. Banning, please be seated. You're not permitted to speak again unless directly addressed. However, Russell couldn't restrain himself. She is fabricating the story, fabricating it all with that dog. Milo advanced one step, displaying no bark, no growl, only his presence. It was then that a shift occurred. A single juror, an older woman wearing a blue sweater, removed her glasses and massaged her temples. Her gaze turned toward another juror, a younger man in his 30s. A shared understanding passed between them, as if a crucial element had finally aligned. However, what followed extended beyond simple validation. It concerned revealing the truth about this man and uncovering any concealed aspects of his character. The courtroom was now engrossed, anticipating each movement, observing every respiration, each involuntary gesture, and every look from Russell Banning. The jury members were no longer relaxed. They were intently focused. Judge Halbert massaged his eyes behind his spectacles. He remained largely silent, yet it was evident a change had occurred within him as well. He had witnessed numerous defendants falter under questioning, but Russell wasn't merely breaking. He was falling apart before their eyes. Andrea stepped back to the podium, her voice even and composed. Detective Morales, did you interview any other parents who observed Mr. Banning interacting with students that day? Morales responded, yes, 3 in total. Someone reported giving a child candy without authorization. Another stated they followed a student into the restroom. Was that student identified? Morales confirmed. Yes. You could hear someone in the gallery whisper, my God. Judge Halbert did not issue a reprimand. He remained silent. Gerald Lasky, attempting to reassert himself, rose. Your Honor, this is speculative. None of those allegations were substantiated, Andrea countered. The statements remained unchallenged, each one delivered before the victim had a chance to respond. Lasky's objection lingered, but it was not sustained. He then took his seat. Andrea turned back to the judge. I request permission to recall the school counselor, Ms. Jenna Holbrook, for follow-up, she stated. Granted, replied Halbert. Ms. Holbrook approached the stand with a quiet seriousness. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, with a thin but clear voice. She adjusted her blazer and spoke directly. Following the school event, I saw Tanya on several occasions. While she was quiet, she frequently drew. Her drawings consistently featured the same man, glasses, shirt, and always positioned behind her. Andrea presented the drawing to the judge and jury. Though a child's artwork, the likeness was undeniable. It depicted Russell, with the same square glasses and jawline. Notably, next to a small representation of herself, was a dog, Milo. She hadn't encountered Milo before this, correct? Andrea questioned, but not until weeks passed. A silence followed. Then Andrea faced Russell. Mr. Banning, can you clarify how a child you assert you've never encountered described you, including your glasses, weeks prior to any legal actions? Russell's lips parted. He closed them, then opened them again. I'm unsure, he mumbled. Perhaps she's disoriented or recalling something, Andrea suggested. The jury remained impassive. The entire courtroom did. Immediately afterward, the courtroom doors swung open. A woman entered discreetly and presented a note to the bailiff. He examined the note, then proceeded directly to the judge. Halbert received the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read it carefully. His eyebrows rose a little. Ms. Selden, he stated, it seems another person has come forward during the break. A former teacher's assistant from Hickory Trail Elementary. She asserts she possesses information directly relevant to this case. She's outside, prepared to testify. Andrea turned her head slowly toward Russell. Remarkably, Hickory Trail falls outside of this jurisdiction. Russell visibly struggled, his jaw tightening. Gerald Lasky moved closer, whispering to his client. Russell dismissed him. Nobody here knows anything, he mumbled. She's simply attempting to damage my reputation. Andrea stepped away. The doors opened once more. A woman, appearing to be in her early 30s, entered. Bridget Alston, her identification tag still attached to her coat. She assumed the witness stand, took the oath, and commenced her testimony. I remember him, she stated, indicating Russell. He volunteered at our school for 3 months in 2019. We received complaints, several, but they never resulted in action because people didn't want to trust the children. Judge Halbert moved closer. Did you file a report? Yes, on 2 occasions, but I was instructed not to escalate the matter. Andrea paused, allowing the jury a moment to process this information. Then Milo made a sudden, brief single bark. Russell visibly reacted. Tanya remained still. Without raising her head, she extended her hand and gave Milo a deliberate, comforting scratch behind the ears. The courtroom now comprehended. Milo's actions weren't erratic. He wasn't displaying distress. He was reacting purposefully, naturally, and with intention. However, what remained unknown was that the ultimate determination wouldn't be derived from the documented evidence. It would stem from the jury's visceral understanding. The courtroom was no longer impartial. It had taken a position, subtly but undeniably. The atmosphere was palpable, evident in the juror's posture, the judge's gesture of pressing his fingertips together, and the measured silence of Andrea Selden, which spoke volumes. The evidence was presented, but it was the responses that resonated. Milos's, Tanya's, and Russell's cut through the surrounding tension. Judge Halbert addressed the jury box, stating, "We will break for deliberation immediately. Jurors, you will be escorted to the conference room." As the jurors rose and exited, Russell slumped heavily into his chair. A slight tremor ran through his hands, though he attempted to conceal it by adjusting his cuffs. Gerald Lasky murmured something to him once more, but Russell offered no reply. His gaze was fixed on Tanya, and she, remaining silent and composed, averted her head. Milo settled back into a relaxed posture, his body curled beside her, his head resting on her shoe, as if the storm had subsided. As if his duties were complete, temporarily, the gallery stayed silent. The room remained still, save for Carla, who rose to stretch and walked over, placing a gentle hand on her sister's shoulder. Kendra hadn't seemed to breathe since the testimony began. Her fingers were red from repeated twisting. "You did well," Carla whispered. "You did better," she responded. The jury had been absent for almost 2 hours. Upon their return, the bailiff brought the room to order. Judge Halbert appeared more weary than previously, but his voice remained firm. "Have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a weathered suit and a tight jaw, rose. "We do, Your Honor." The question came, "And how do you find the defendant, Russell Banning, on the count of criminal misconduct with a minor?" "Guilty," the foreman stated, the word falling with a weighty certainty. It resonated, clear enough for all present. "Regarding the count of trespassing on school property with intent to harm?" "Guilty." Russell Banning's shoulders slumped. He remained silent, offering no outburst. The outburst had ceased. Only a sense of quiet acceptance lingered. Andrea shut her binder. There were no celebratory gestures, no smiles, just a feeling of relief. Securing a case such as this doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like air flowing back into a space that was suffocated for too long. Judge Halbert addressed Tanya. "Ms. Ellison, I observe that you spoke sparingly today, but you conveyed more than many adults ever manage. And I believe you." Tanya remained composed, but she nodded. "And Milo," Halbert peered over his glasses. "I've never expressed this in a courtroom, but if I possessed a medal to award, he would be wearing it." A few people chuckled softly for the first time in hours. Subsequently, in the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters assembled. Microphones, cameras, the typical commotion. Kendra moved protectively before her daughter. "No questions today," she stated firmly. "We're simply going home." Carla opened the passenger door. Milo entered first. Then Tanya climbed in beside him. The car ride home was quiet. Carla remained silent. Kendra didn't press. However, halfway along the highway, Tanya spoke up. "Will he go away forever?" Kendra glanced in the rearview mirror. "I don't know, baby, but he won't hurt you again. That's for sure." Tanya stroked Milo's fur. He licked her hand. Upon arriving home, Carla hung up her coat and reached for the leash to walk Milo. Tanya followed her to the door. "Can I come?" "You don't have to." "I want to." Beneath a pale sky, they walked in silence. There were no cars, no barking, only the sound of gravel beneath their shoes. At one moment, Tanya paused and looked upwards. "Do you think other kids are scared like I was?" Carla nodded. Tanya fell silent for a moment. Then she inquired, "Can we teach other dogs, too?" Carla regarded her. This little girl who had once gone completely silent, now formulating plans. "Yeah," she replied softly. "I think we can." But this story wasn't simply about a dog or a courtroom. The focus was on the moment a child's experiences are finally validated, and when staying silent isn't the only path to safety. 2 weeks following the trial, subtle changes began to emerge. These weren't dramatic or obvious, but appeared in minor details that only a select few observed. Tanya was able to sleep soundly through the night without any awakenings. Kendra ceased the habit of leaving all the lights on in the house. And Milo, he stopped standing watch outside Tanya's bedroom door. He settled on her rug instead, peaceful, understanding his girl no longer needed to sleep with her shoes on. However, recovery isn't always linear. One afternoon, while Carla and Tanya were organizing dog toys in the living room, a letter arrived. Carla held the letter, glancing over to Tanya, who was now guiding Milo to stay with a simple hand signal. "You did that," she remarked. Tanya looked up. "No, we did." Carla smiled and settled down beside her. "You know what most people forget?" She continued. "Adults don't always have the answers." She paused. "But when kids speak, even if it's frightening, even if it's chaotic, it stirs something in everyone else." Tanya considered this briefly, then murmured, "I didn't think anyone would believe me." Carla nodded. "That's why your input was particularly valuable." Later that week, they went back to the backyard for the first time since Milo's training. Carla brought out an old duffel bag filled with harnesses and treats, and Tanya brought her sketch pad. She sat under the tree, sketching out commands, hand signals, and little notes only she could understand. Milo dozed nearby, one paw twitching in his sleep. Kendra came outside, holding 2 lemonades. "I was thinking," she said, handing one to Carla. "Perhaps we could discuss partnering with the local shelter and see if they would allow us to train a couple of dogs there. It would be a small undertaking, just a trial run." Carla raised her eyebrows. "Are you certain?" Kendra replied with a half-smile. "Yes, but I'm tired of being afraid." A few months later, they were conducting weekend sessions at a small training field in the city park. They called it Signals, and word spread slowly. Parents brought kids, shelters brought dogs. Some of the children didn't talk much, some didn't talk at all. Without fail, they appeared every Saturday. Even Milo, despite his advancing age, consistently attended. He remained silent, offering no barks or growls, but observed attentively. Tanya would position herself at the forefront, notebook in hand, providing instructions in concise, easily understood steps. A microphone was unnecessary. People drew near to listen. Periodically, she would look towards Carla, seeking confirmation. Carla would respond with a thumbs up, or occasionally simply offer silent encouragement if you got this. And Tanya succeeded. Individuals who had learned about the case would approach Tanya in public. Some offered thanks, while others remained silent, simply smiling and departing. Tanya didn't require recognition. She found satisfaction in the possibility that someone, somewhere, might now be more likely to believe child. One evening, while closing up the field, Carla asked her, "Do you ever wish that day in court had unfolded differently?" Tanya looked up from brushing Milo's fur. "No, not even a little." She shook her head. If it hadn't occurred as it did, nobody would have witnessed who he truly was. Carla paused. The quiet confidence she held for her niece continued to surprise her. Prior to leaving, they paused before the small painted sign near the gate. It displayed Sig Nulls in red, with a paw print substituting the A. This was Tanya's suggestion. Carla placed her hand on Tanya's shoulder. "You transformed something terrible into something that helps people," she said. Tanya smiled. "He helped me first," she replied. She glanced down at Milo. He blinked up at her, his tail wagging softly. He no longer required instructions. He was already prepared, and perhaps that was the intention. It's often the case that those who appear least imposing possess the most profound insights. And frequently, the most subdued voices resonate most powerfully, particularly when someone or something offers unwavering support. If you've reached this point, thank you. Consider this a prompt to pay close attention, especially when interacting with children, and to trust their instincts when they express discomfort. You may be the only person to do so. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Remember, there's always someone waiting to be believed. A judge publicly fined her concerning a small cross necklace, believing she was simply another person present. However, when she rose and spoke, the entire courtroom became quiet, and the subsequent events left even the bailiff astonished. Alana Merriweather did not go to the Rutherford County Courthouse, anticipating conflict. She went to support her younger cousin, Deshawn, who'd been arrested following a routine traffic stop that had escalated into a considerably larger matter. She requested a day of leave from work, chose a navy blue blouse, slacks, and flats. The outfit was simple and understated, yet respectful. A delicate gold chain with a small cross hung around her neck. It was not ostentatious, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. Someone did notice. The courtroom was full. It contained people awaiting their turns, lawyers reviewing documents, and deputies positioned along the walls. Alana settled into the second row, remaining quiet and composed. Her purse rested in her lap. She nodded softly to her cousin, who appeared exhausted from stress, his eyes weighed down by fatigue. He remained silent, offering her a look of thanks. That was sufficient. Judge Raymond Keller entered with his characteristic formal walk. The judge was known for a particular demeanor. Across Murfreesboro and in surrounding areas, lawyers spoke of his meticulous nature, traditional, direct, and unyielding. A Vietnam veteran who transitioned to a legal career, He regarded the courtroom as a space of great importance. His space. The bailiff called the room to order. Before proceeding, Judge Keller addressed the room, looking at the attendees as he said, "I'd like to address a matter of decorum." He looked directly at Alana. "You, ma'am, the one in blue. Please rise." Alana blinked, surprised, and slowly stood. Her heart thudded a little faster, but she kept her posture straight. "You're wearing a religious symbol," he said, his voice firm. "That's not permitted in my courtroom. Neutrality matters here." A fine of $50 was levied for disrupting court decorum. The room fell silent. Some individuals adjusted in their seats. Others averted their gaze, visibly uncomfortable. Alana did not respond immediately. She was familiar with being publicly singled out, questioned, and dismissed, yet she still felt surprised. A fine? For wearing a necklace? She glanced at the bailiff, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," she stated calmly, "is this a published policy? Could you please direct me to the statute or court rule that permits that penalty?" Keller showed no visible reaction. "This is my courtroom. I established the procedures." Alana nodded thoughtfully. "I comprehend that, sir. However, are those procedures documented anywhere?" He fixed his gaze on her for a brief moment. "You may pay the fine at the clerk's desk, or you may depart." She detected a quiet intake of breath from someone seated behind her. Alana remained still. She did not speak louder. She did not engage in debate. She merely inclined her head slightly and stated, "I am not leaving." A gentleman in the front row, an older man wearing a tan suit, lifted his eyebrow. His gaze moved from her to Judge Keller and back again. Judge Keller slowly straightened his robe. "Then you will be held in contempt?" The bailiff subtly changed his stance. The prosecutor set aside his file. A palpable change occurred. The atmosphere felt denser, not with theatrics, but with focused concentration. Alana released a single breath through her nose. "I'm here to support my cousin, Deshaun Grissom. The charges are being formally presented today, and he requested my presence. I'm not intending to cause any disturbance, Your Honor. However, I contend that this fine is not only unjust, but potentially unlawful." Judge Keller moved forward a little. "Did you question my jurisdiction?" Her expression remained unchanged. "I am requesting an explanation of the policy and its legal basis." He hesitated briefly. It was slight, almost unnoticeable, but the pause was present. He did not anticipate that. "Who are you?" he inquired, his voice growing tense. "My name is Alana Meriwether," she replied, "and I'm a constitutional attorney licensed in 3 states, including Tennessee." The courtroom cracked open. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath. Someone whispered under their breath, "Damn." She continued, measured and composed, "I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2010. I've worked for the Southern Center for Human Rights, and I currently serve as senior counsel at a nonprofit based in Memphis. I am present as a family member, but I understand the law, and I am aware of my rights." Keller relaxed back in his chair. For the first time, he appeared uneasy, not angry, simply unsteady. She could have smiled. She refrained. The ensuing silence was palpable. The judge began to speak, but stopped, instead rearranging the papers on his desk. However, the judge was unaware of who he was addressing. Alana did not grow up with wealth. She was raised in Jackson, Mississippi, in a faded brick duplex off of Robinson Road. Denise, her mother, held overnight shifts at the Willow Creek nursing home, and her father left when she was 8. Resources were scarce, but a set of principles guided them. Speak with clarity. Avoid minimizing your worth. Assert yourself when injustice occurs, but maintain composure and a dignified demeanor. By the age of 16, Alana had studied the Constitution from beginning to end on 2 separate occasions. She sought to comprehend the disparate treatment experienced by individuals like herself in courtrooms, offices, stores, and even churches. Her motivation wasn't anger, but rather a genuine curiosity. There was also a deeper element at play, a quiet determination. People consistently underestimated her, not only due to her brown skin or her choice to wear her hair natural, but also in subtle ways, like overlooking her in meetings. She remembered the way older male attorneys would address her as young lady, within rooms filled with men experiencing thinning hair and fragile egos. She quickly understood that possessing brilliance was insufficient. There were times when it needed to be carried quietly, allowing them to believe they were more astute, until they unwittingly stepped into a carefully constructed plan. When Alana was accepted into Harvard Law, it felt less like a joyous occasion and more like a validation. She had previously informed her high school counselor that her aspiration was to become a civil rights attorney. A genuine laugh escaped her. Then, she cautioned that law school presented fierce competition and wasn't necessarily a viable option. Alana remained silent. She simply intensified her studies. While attending Harvard, she wasn't boisterous. She found no need to be. She consistently occupied the front row of each constitutional law class, rapidly taking notes and posing questions that caused professors to pause. People began to observe her, yet still regarded her as unusual. This perception never felt satisfactory to her. After graduating, she declined 2 offers from large firms seeking impactful work. She spent several years in Alabama, defending minors within the legal system. Then, she moved to Memphis to join a nonprofit dedicated to combating housing discrimination. While she didn't gain widespread recognition, her work secured people's release from jail and kept families in their homes, transforming lives. Throughout this, she consistently wore her small gold cross, a deeply personal symbol. The brooch had been her grandmother's, accompanied by a handwritten note. It read, "Wear this when you need to be reminded you're not alone." Her grandmother never removed it. Not once. Not even in court. Therefore, when Judge Keller singled her out, calling her out as if she were a disruptive teenager in detention, it didn't unsettle her. It evoked memories of the instances she's experienced being looked at and not truly seen. They never anticipated her. They anticipated the boisterous one, the angry one. There was someone poised to lash out or leave abruptly. Instead, they experienced something else entirely, a demonstration of precision, control, and strength through composure. This wasn't unprecedented. In 2017, within a courtroom in Little Rock, she observed a public defender struggle during a bail hearing. The judge seemed disengaged. The defendant, a 19-year-old facing trespassing charges at an abandoned building, was on the verge of being assigned $1,500 bail, an amount he was unlikely to afford. Alana rose, introduced herself, and referenced 3 Arkansas statutes that the judge seemed to have missed. The judge conceded. Bail was waived. The defendant was released that same day. That demonstrated her character. Consequently, sitting in Rutherford County, facing a fine for a necklace of great personal significance, before a judge who believed he could compel her to be silent, Alana remained steadfast. She straightened her posture. When she introduced herself to the courtroom, her name, her qualifications, her purpose for being present, it wasn't intended for Judge Keller. It was directed toward everyone who perceived her as simply someone's relative. However, today wasn't a day when silence was an option. The courtroom remained quiet for an unusually long time. Judge Keller shuffled papers, seemingly stalling. But Alana remained still, her hands clasped before her, patiently waiting. Not contesting, merely waiting. From the far corner, the prosecutor subtly adjusted his posture, his fingers still. The bailiff's gaze moved between Keller and Alana. A change was palpable. The room's power dynamic had altered. It wasn't solely emanating from the bench. Keller spoke, clearing his throat. "This court will proceed with the next case." He refrained from mentioning the fine again, at least for now. However, the absence of his usual reprimand was keenly observed. Deshawn's case was then called. He remained standing, still wearing the wrinkled button-down shirt from county lockup. He looked at Alana, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. She offered him a singular, composed glance, a look conveying, "Don't panic. I've got this." The public defender approached the table. However, before he could speak, Alana moved forward. "Your Honor," she stated distinctly, "with the court's permission, I would like to represent Mr. Grissom today. I've reviewed the charges and spoken with him. He desires me to stand in his defense." Judge Keller looked up. "You aren't listed as counsel. I presented my bar card. My Tennessee license is current." You can verify with the Board of Professional Responsibility. I am listed as Alana Joy Merriweather. He paused a moment too long and then nodded once. Proceed. Alana moved to stand beside Deshawn. Her cousin appeared to want to laugh and cry simultaneously. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder as she turned to address the court. Mr. Grissom was stopped due to a non-functioning tail light. The arrest report indicates he was asked to leave the vehicle and subjected to a search without consent. No warrant was present. The officer's statement made no mention of probable cause. Additionally, the encounter progressed to resisting arrest when he inquired about the reason for being handcuffed. He did not raise his voice, nor did he threaten anyone. She retrieved a document from her purse. I've submitted a written motion to dismiss, supported by 3 Tennessee Supreme Court rulings. Each affirms that a warrantless search under these circumstances constitutes a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Additionally, the resisting arrest charge lacks supporting video evidence, despite officers wearing department-issued body cams. The room was still again. Alana frowned, leaned back, and accepted the motion from a clerk. He reviewed it. It was evident. With a rapid scan of the room and a slight twitch of his jaw, Alana remained silent. She stood motionless, allowing him to read, while ensuring her presence was undeniable. Behind her, people subtly adjusted their positions, not from disinterest, but from focused attention. This was no longer the woman they believed was in distress just moments prior. This was a different person altogether. Judge Keller looked up. You wrote this motion yourself? I did. I prepared this draft last night following a review of the police report and a conversation regarding the arrest with Mr. Grissom, and I am not affiliated with a law firm. I am employed by a civil rights nonprofit. Our organization focuses on due process violations, housing discrimination, and wrongful convictions. The judge tapped the motion lightly on the desk. Your client's record? No prior arrests. No violent offenses. He's a full-time electrician's apprentice, simply trying to get to work on time the day this occurred. Another long silence. Keller turned to the prosecutor. State's position? The prosecutor paused. We'd be willing to dismiss the resisting charge. Maintain the traffic infraction. Alana spoke again, her voice resolute. We'd agree to that only with the court confirmation that the search was unlawful. Mr. Grissom deserves that documented. It was a confident move. No apologies. No hesitation. Simply a direct, justifiable request supported by legal precedent. Keller observed her. The courtroom rarely witnessed such assertiveness. A woman, a black woman, effortlessly navigating legal procedures. She did so without displaying anger or arrogance, simply presenting clear and precise facts. He adjusted his glasses. The motion to dismiss was granted. The traffic infraction remains with a warning, and no fines will be assessed. Alana offered a subtle nod, devoid of a smile or celebratory gestures. She then turned to Deshawn. You're free to go. He paused momentarily, as if his body needed time to process the news. Subsequently, he left the defendant's table and embraced her firmly. A murmur rippled through the courtroom once more. It wasn't regarding the case itself, but about her. However, what Alana did next silenced everyone. Instead of returning to her place, she faced the bench, her voice remaining calm. Before I sit down, Your Honor, I would like to formally challenge the fine issued earlier this morning. Keller visibly recoiled, as if startled. Do you want to reopen that matter? He asked. Yes, sir, she replied. You stated that religious symbols were not permitted in your courtroom. However, unless this courtroom is functioning under martial law, the First Amendment remains applicable. Her tone was measured. She did not need to raise her voice. In County of Allegheny versus ACLU, the Supreme Court underscored the requirement for government institutions to maintain neutrality rather than hostility towards religion. Prohibiting a small cross pendant, particularly from an individual who is not testifying or speaking to the court at that moment, does not represent neutrality. The action appeared as targeted suppression, and the gallery had gone completely still. Alana advanced 1 foot. Additionally, there was no written policy displayed, no public signage indicating the ban, and no prior warning provided. I am found without citation, without precedent, and without any attempt to verify my intent or role in the proceedings. Keller adjusted in his seat. His face had lost some of its typical composure. One could observe something stirring behind his eyes: calculation, doubt, perhaps even shame. Are you suggesting the court violated your rights? He inquired. Alana remained motionless. I am not making accusations. I am presenting established facts. I request the fine be rescinded, and the court record should indicate that this incident transpired outside established protocol. The prosecutor glanced up momentarily, then resumed, looking down. The bailiff's hands were now clasped before him, his jaw tense, and his posture more formal. Keller hesitated before replying. He fixed his gaze on her for a prolonged, intense period. Then he announced, "The fine is withdrawn." This wouldn't be documented. Alana offered a brief nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." She pivoted and proceeded to her place with composure. Murmurs arose once more. However, this time, they weren't filled with uncertainty. Instead, they conveyed interest and deference. A woman seated behind her silently asked another, "Who is she?" Alana remained uninvolved. She simply took her seat, retrieved her notebook, and gently opened it to a fresh page. The judge, for the first time that morning, seemed to be truly contemplating. His movements became more deliberate. He examined the files with greater attention. The issue he's ignited by the fine for the necklace had escalated. It had become something more significant. The prosecutor spoke quietly to the bailiff, who acknowledged with a nod and jotted a note. The shift was noticeable. Court reconvened. Several more cases were heard. However, the usual flow was disrupted. The observers were no longer focused on the legal charges. Their gazes repeatedly returned to Alana Merriweather, the woman who had corrected a judge without raising her voice. 30 minutes elapsed. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Keller called for a brief recess. He rose and exited through the side door silently. Alana remained seated. The bailiff approached her slowly. "Mom," he said, softer than previously, "may I pose a question to you?" She turned her head slightly. "Of course. Did you anticipate that occurring? Regarding the fine? Concerning everything?" Alana emitted the slightest laugh through her nose. "No, I was unaware of that, but I wasn't willing to ignore it." The bailiff touched the back of his neck. "I've been here for 8 years," he said. "Never seen him back down like that." "He's not a bad man," she said softly. "But power without accountability is dangerous," he agreed. It wasn't a matter of obligation, but comprehension. Further down the hall, 2 court reporters spoke quietly. The younger one appeared visibly shaken. She was familiar with every case, reciting them easily. "Lawyer?" one asked. "Yes, from Harvard. Can you believe that?" She attended to support her cousin and unexpectedly challenged the judge. The courtroom observers expressed disbelief. However, Alana felt no sense of triumph. She found no pleasure in undermining someone. Her purpose wasn't to shame Keller. She simply sought justice. When it was lacking, she created it herself, carefully and deliberately. Yet a subtle shift began to appear in Judge Keller's gaze. Upon his return to the courtroom, Judge Keller seemed altered. His posture lacked its previous rigidity. He appeared unchanged in stature, simply quieter. No longer seemed a man attempting to maintain authority, but rather someone attempting to grasp how he relinquished it without awareness. He took a seat, adjusted his glasses, and proceeded to the next case. Even his voice had diminished in tone. It was subtly altered, almost imperceptible to an ordinary observer, yet Alana recognized it. She had witnessed this previously. Men in positions of influence struggling with a reality they resisted acknowledging. That they had transgressed a boundary, and someone unanticipated had retaliated. As the courtroom emptied and people moved towards the exit, Keller remained seated on the bench, his gaze fixed forward. Alana collected her belongings and was nearing the door when she heard him call out, "Ms. Merriweather." She paused and turned, her face showing no emotion. He rose from his seat and descended the steps deliberately, as if considering each one. "I'd like a word, if you're willing." The bailiff seemed uneasy, questioning whether this was a directive or a private inquiry. Alana offered a subtle nod, then turned to Deshawn. "Give me 5," she murmured to him. Keller refrained from escorting her into chambers. They remained just outside the vacant courtroom, maintaining enough distance for some discretion, yet remaining visible. He cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Alana didn't reply. Not yet. She allowed him to formulate his thoughts. "I formed an assumption," he proceeded, "an inequitable one, regarding your intentions, regarding your position. I was mistaken," she responded gently, but without resentment. He lowered his gaze. "That's the difficulty, isn't it? One shouldn't need to be." Another pause. "I have dedicated 32 years to that bench," Keller stated, "and I have valued order, structure, neutrality. But you help me understand, occasionally what we consider neutral is simply convenient for those already in power." The statement impacted him more profoundly than anticipated. Alana simply looked at him, maintaining steady, respectful eye contact. There was no trace of ego, only honesty in her silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he stated, "but I will say this. I won't forget today." Alana offered a slight nod. "That's all I hoped for." She prepared to leave, but he called out to her one last time. "If you're ever back in Murfreesboro, I'd be honored to hear you argue again." That element genuinely surprised her. "I hope not to need to," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. They both understood the unspoken meaning behind her words. The sun had risen higher, and the heat was intense. Deshawn stood near the sidewalk, looking at his phone. He brightened when he saw her. "What is that?" he asked, astonished. Alana shrugged, retrieving her keys from her purse. "Just a small civics lesson." "Seriously, you confronted a judge in his home." She gave him a look. "Don't make it sound heroic. I didn't go there to fight. I want to hear what he had to say." When someone attempts to diminish your importance for reasons related to your identity, you face a choice: remain silent or voice your perspective. Deshawn leaned against her car, nodding slowly. "I swear, if I didn't know you better, I'd say you rehearsed that," I remarked. She laughed. "I didn't, but maybe I should start writing it down." At that moment, a local reporter from the Murfreesboro News-Journal approached, holding a voice recorder and a notebook. "Ms. Merriweather?" Alana turned. "I observed what unfolded. Our readers would likely appreciate hearing your perspective. Would you consider an interview?" She looked at Deshawn, then returned her gaze to the reporter. "Let me consider that." The reporter offered her a card and stepped back. "You prompted considerable thought today. Such occurrences are infrequent in court." As I walked toward the car, Deshawn remarked, "They will discuss this, you know." Alana shrugged again. "Let them." However, what transpired outside the courtroom held equal significance. As Alana and Deshawn arrived at his apartment complex on the west side of Murfreesboro, his phone was constantly buzzing. Calls, texts, and even direct messages flooded in. A cousin in Chattanooga had already learned the news. A friend from high school had sent a screenshot of a local news blog displaying the headline: "Attorney silently dismantles courtroom bias. Judge withdraws fine, dismisses case." Deshawn looked at her, his eyes wide. "It's already on the internet?" Alana offered a small smile. "I mentioned to you, people discuss events, particularly when expectations aren't met." She did not seek recognition. Not currently. Not in the past. However, there were occasions when being noticed wasn't a decision. It was a consequence of acting correctly when the option of remaining unnoticed wasn't available. Afterward that evening, she was at her kitchen table, drinking tea, the small cross necklace still on her collarbone. Her inbox contained numerous messages, some from familiar people, others from unknown individuals. Several legal blogs had already published summaries. A user on Twitter had shared a clip from the live stream, adding the caption, "This is how you correct injustice," without ever raising your voice. However, Alana wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was considering a statement from Judge Keller. What we often consider neutral is simply convenient for those already wielding the authority. That observation resonated with her. She recalled her childhood, holding her grandmother's hand during evening church service. The pastor's words resonated. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not shout. It's stand. Initially, It seemed like a poetic statement. Now it felt genuine. The following day, she returned to her position at the nonprofit office in Memphis. Her colleagues did not alter their behavior toward her. There were no celebratory balloons or enthusiastic applause. Instead, one of the interns presented her with a file and requested she review a housing complaint by noon. She appreciated the normalcy of it. Information still circulated, even without her direct involvement. A week later, she received a call from the Middle Tennessee State University Law Department. They were planning a community forum concerning courtroom ethics and bias, and a member of their board had recommended her as a speaker. She nearly declined. Nearly. Then she recalled the courtroom, the shift in people's gaze when they recognized her as an individual, and how many others remained voiceless, awaiting someone to advocate for them. Consequently, she consented to participate in the forum. 14 days later, a pastor from a church in Smyrna contacted her. He requested that she address their youth group regarding the law, its true meaning, its protective function, and how it can be applied equitably if individuals understand how to ensure its accountability. She accepted the invitation. She continued to agree, not due to enjoying the focus, but because the narrative was no longer solely hers. It belonged to all who had ever occupied the rear of a courtroom and considered, "They won't hear me." She had never shared this with Keller. However, that day had also altered her. She frequently reflected on him. She questioned whether he retained that moment within his memory as she did. If he ever observed someone in his courtroom differently afterward, perhaps with increased consideration, perhaps with a touch more humility. She hoped so. One Friday afternoon, as she was leaving the office, she noticed an envelope affixed to her door. It bore no name and no return address, only her name typed neatly. Inside was a brief note that read, "Ms. Merriweather, I've revised the courtroom conduct guidelines. Religious attire or symbols, unless disruptive, will no longer be penalized." That was all. There was no apology. No signature appeared beyond the initials. Yet it was sufficient. She folded the note and placed it within her grandmother's Bible. Alana Merriweather didn't seek recognition. She desired equity. Certain narratives briefly capture attention before fading. Others resonate deeply, altering perspectives, even without direct interaction with the individual who initiated that change. For Alana Merriweather, that courtroom moment represented not a culmination, but a segment within a more extensive narrative. A narrative encompassing decisions largely unseen by others. For instance, staying up all night to assist a tenant contesting an unlawful eviction. Dealing with late-night calls from worried mothers whose sons were detained without bail. Or traveling 3 hours to a courthouse in Jackson simply to observe a judge who was reported to be unfairly treating defendants with limited financial resources. She made no introductions. She simply observed, documented her findings, and waited for discernible trends to emerge. When questioned about her composure and restraint in the face of disrespect, she consistently replied, "I know what I carry." She didn't need to demonstrate its weight to show it was heavy. That courtroom didn't alter her. It simply reinforced why she selected this profession initially. Not for recognition, not for retribution, for respect. She had no desire to embarrass Judge Keller. She aimed to make him consider. And in that, she was successful. Some time passed, and during a talk with a group of teenage girls at a public charter school in Memphis, one of them asked, "Weren't you the woman who spoke directly to the judge and caused him to appear mistaken?" Alana responded with a smile. "I didn't speak directly to him. I spoke with purpose. And I didn't cause him to appear mistaken. I offered him an opportunity to reconsider." The girls seemed surprised. "Isn't that essentially the same thing?" Alana replied, "Not in the slightest." Several of the girls chuckled, but a few seemed to take her words to heart. Those were the ones she intended to reach. She continued, "The goal isn't to win arguments. It's to win ground, so the next person doesn't have to fight the same fight." That resonated with them, just as it resonated with her. She understood her story might disappear from news feeds. The tweets, the blogs, the clipped videos, they'd all be lost eventually. But someone would remember. Someone in the gallery who witnessed that moment unfold. Someone who'd felt invisible that day and walked out feeling a little stronger. That was sufficient. Some individuals enter a space seeking attention. Others, like Alana, enter, communicate with precision, and leave a lasting impact. The gold cross remained a daily adornment. She would be prepared again if another courtroom attempted to challenge its presence. For invariably, someone will attempt to diminish you to align with their expectations. And equally, a decision will always present itself. To diminish or to stand, to speak or to allow silence to convey your message. She elected to stand. With insight, not with empty words. Not with arrogance, but with a clear objective. And that's what caused people to recall. Not that she achieved victory, but how she achieved it. If this narrative resonated with you even slightly, if it prompted thought, emotion, or introspection, then please don't keep it private. Subscribe, distribute it, and help spread it. You never know when your steady voice might be the one that transforms the atmosphere. He entered the bank, his appearance marked by a tattered coat and old shoes. People assumed he was simply another person experiencing homelessness. Then, he spoke calmly, stating, "I own the land this building sits on," and presented documentation to support his claim. The door's chimes sounded as it always did upon entry, yet few people acknowledged it. They barely glanced up. A few fleeting looks were all it received. One woman subtly shifted her position to observe him before returning to her computer screen. Another took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes, murmuring something to the teller beside her. A man entering the space appeared out of sync with the surroundings, not threatening, simply different. The environment consisted of shiny glass, polished tile, and Bluetooth headsets visible behind the counters. This was Morris Coltrane Langston, age 62, with a thick gray beard. His coat was 2 sizes too large, and his jeans suggested a past no one wished to explore. He moved deliberately, not due to age, but with caution. Each step felt significant, as if he were assessing his place within the setting. He approached the counter where Brittany was working. She offered him a brief look. "Sir, a bank card or ID is required for withdrawals," she stated plainly. Morris offered a gentle smile, though it seemed weary. "I don't require a withdrawal. I need to discuss property," he said. Brittany's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her colleague, who was visibly trying to contain laughter. "Property?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "I believe I own the land this bank is built on." At that moment, the laughter erupted. The message originated from Cliff Yarrow, the assistant branch manager, who had approached, arms crossed. Cliff was a man who displayed his authority prominently. He made no attempt to conceal his amusement. "Sir, I believe you are at the incorrect building," Cliff stated. "This is not the county records office. You cannot simply enter and declare ownership of a bank." "I did not say I own the bank," Maurice responded, his voice quiet. "I said I own the land. There's a distinction." Now, all eyes were upon him. The security guard, identified as Lee, who typically appeared to be checking his phone near the door, stood up straighter and moved forward. Cliff questioned, "Do you have any paperwork to back that up?" Maurice slowly reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Lee reacted, conditioned by experience to anticipate a potential threat when a black man reached into a pocket. However, Morris's movements were unhurried and non-threatening. He carried the envelope deliberately, as if accustomed to it. He produced a thick, crumpled packet. The pages were yellowed with worn edges, having been folded and unfolded numerous times. At the top, it read, "Franklin Delroy, 1913 land deed." Below that were stamped legal seals and notary signatures. "I've held on to this since my father passed," I said. "And he kept it since his father passed," Maurice added. The deed belonged to a black-owned cooperative that obtained plots throughout this section of Knoxville during the Reconstruction era. I tapped the envelope gently. "This confirms my grandfather did not sell the land. It was leased. Ownership returned to us following a default, though this information was never shared." Brittany's smirk disappeared. Lee stopped scrolling. Cliff cleared his throat. "I believe it's time for you to leave, sir," he stated. "I think it's time someone examines the contents," Maurice said calmly. Then, an unexpected event occurred. A man from the office furthest to the left, John Delgado, the branch manager, emerged. He had been observing through the glass for the preceding few minutes. He requested the documents. Morris provided them immediately. John escorted them back to his office. A period of silence followed, lasting briefly. Subsequently, 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Eventually, John appeared. His expression was altered. "Connect me with regional compliance on the line." Immediately, he stated. As phones began to ring and conversations grew concerned, Maurice remained still at his position by the counter. He was anticipating something, and they all understood, instinctively, that it wasn't a monetary request. Cliff walked back and forth behind the teller row, massaging the back of his neck, as if that would aid his comprehension of what he's heard. John Delgado continued on the phone, speaking in brief, strained sentences to someone at corporate. His office blinds were partially closed, but every few seconds, a glimpse of his face emerged from the gap. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brittany stood uncomfortably at her station, looking sideways at Maurice, who hadn't moved from his position. His hands were folded, and documents rested gently on the counter in front of him. "Do you want to sit down?" she finally asked, her voice softer. Maurice shook his head. "I've done enough sitting in my life." A man in a tailored suit and thick-rimmed glasses walked in briskly from the back entrance. His ID badge read Gerald Tisdale, Regional Property and Compliance. He went straight to Delgado's office without a word. Moments later, John opened the door again and waved for Maurice. "Sir, would you mind stepping in for a moment?" Maurice nodded once and retrieved his envelope. His boots made a slight scuffing sound against the tile as he entered the office. As the door closed behind him, the remaining staff members quieted. No one spoke. Even the security guard adjusted his position, uncertain whether to remain nearby or act as if nothing was occurring. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. "Mr. Langston," Gerald stated cautiously, "I've reviewed the original deed and the tax history you provided. Could you please tell us where you've been keeping these documents?" "My father kept it in a box of his belongings," Maurice responded. "He was a carpenter, building houses in Alcoa and Maryville before his knees failed. After he passed away, I kept the papers in a locker at a storage unit I used when I lacked permanent housing." Delgado appeared astonished. "You're saying this land was never sold? That the trust was still active?" Maurice retrieved a smaller, more recent envelope and gave it to Gerald. Inside was a typed letter from a small firm in Chattanooga, a probate specialist named Lena Fry, confirming the lapse in city filings and the reversion clause in the original agreement. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I only found it after she assisted me in reviewing some of my dad's old files. "Thought it was junk at first," Gerald said, staring at the paper. His mouth opened a little, but he didn't speak. "Legally," Maurice explained, "this building stood on land that was part of my grandfather's estate. The lease agreement had been temporary. As the bank underwent mergers and changes in ownership over the years, the arrangement wasn't renewed. They simply built on the land, presuming no one would inquire." Delgado rubbed his temple. "That represented decades of transactions," Maurice stated, "and not a single one examined the records far enough back. Everyone seemed to think the past had resolved itself." Gerald rose quickly and gazed out the office window. "We need to involve legal right away," he stated. "Already done," John responded quietly. A voice drifted from outside the office, speaking too loudly. Why would a homeless man return for this now? What would he possibly do with a piece of land beneath a bank? Inside, Maurice noticed. He glanced towards the window, then resumed looking at Gerald. "I didn't come for money," he said. "I came seeking the truth, and perhaps a measure of respect." Gerald turned, finally meeting my eyes. There was a pause. "You are not wrong, but while discussions focused on compliance and liability, something else was unfolding in the lobby. Whispers had escalated to murmurs, and one employee was already texting someone outside the bank. The story, as it turns out, began long before Maurice ever entered that bank. Prior to the advent of smartphones, before suburban expansion consumed agricultural land, before the concept of a man like Maurice could be envisioned, standing serenely with a document, contesting the very core of a multi-million-dollar organization. In 1913, Franklin Delroy, Morris's grandfather, was 23 years old and already recognized within Blount County for his skilled workmanship. His hands constructed churches, schoolhouses, and porches that remained standing a century later. Unbeknownst to many, Franklin was also a member of a discreet, close-knit group of black tradesmen, farmers, and ministers who combined their resources to purchase land. The purpose wasn't financial gain, but a matter of dignity. They identified as the East Bluntland Cooperative, and throughout the years, they obtained small plots on the periphery of what was then essentially cow pasture. However, Franklin, ever the visionary, included a specific provision in his deed. Should the land ever undergo development, leasing, or a claim by another party without a sale, ownership would return to his descendants after a specified duration. In 1927, a lumber company made a payment to lease the land for a limited time. Subsequently, a warehouse was constructed, followed by a small credit union. By the 1970s, that credit union had transformed into a regional bank. And when it was acquired again in 2003, all of the original documents were misplaced, overlooked, or lost within the new ownership. The Delroy family was never notified. Franklin was gone by that point. Morris's father, Jasper Langston, attempted to preserve the family's history. However, circumstances grew difficult. Employment opportunities disappeared, and Jasper began drinking. The traditional stories evolved into mere bedtime stories, losing any sense of verifiable truth. Morris recalled sitting on the porch in his youth, listening to his dad describe the plot by the rail tracks that Granddaddy owned. Yet, it held little significance for him. The stories remained just that, stories, until he matured and understood how families like his were frequently excluded from their own history. In 2020, when COVID caused widespread closures and Morris was residing in a church basement in Sevierville, he finally sorted through the last of his father's possessions. Among them, he discovered the original deed carefully wrapped in wax paper, and within it, a small note written in his dad's handwriting. "If you find this, don't let him tell you we didn't leave anything behind." Morris took that note with great importance. He dedicated months to research at the public library. He made trips to the county clerk's office. He consulted with Lena Fry, the probate attorney who remained professional when he shared the story with her. She located the land records and carefully compared parcel numbers, and she verified his findings. The land, now valued at millions, had been leased, not sold. The original clause remained in effect. No legal purchase had ever occurred. Consequently, after years of homelessness, this situation seems quite unusual. Morris entered the building constructed upon his grandfather's land and stated something unexpected. "I believe this belongs to me." At the bank, John Delgado now had the documents spread across his desk. They contained a century's worth of signatures, carbon copies, and ink stamps from courthouses that no longer existed. Gerald, the regional compliance officer, examined one page as if it had committed a personal offense. According to this clause, he stated, "The property returns to the original family if the lease expires without renewal or sale." John confirmed this had occurred twice, and the family was not notified. "That's correct." A significant silence followed. Then Gerald quietly expressed concern, saying, "We're in trouble." Maurice remained seated opposite them, silent. He showed no sign of a smile. However, a sense of calm was evident on his face. It was as if a man had, at long last, joined together all the pieces of a puzzle and possessed the perseverance to complete it. As events aligned within that office, a woman on her lunch break began live streaming the growing disturbance outside the bank. The unfolding situation quickly transcended their internal narrative. The lobby's ambience underwent a change. Initial silent assessment evolved into quiet wonder. The atmosphere then became something different altogether, a palpable sense of nervous anticipation. A teller had moved away from her workspace and was positioned by the coffee machine, appearing to stir sugar while observing the office door as if expecting someone to enter. The security guard had repositioned himself, now standing nearer to Morris's chair, seemingly not for protection, but perhaps to observe. Beyond the glass partitions, John Delgado's office was full. Gerald Tisdale was participating in a video conference with a group of legal representatives from corporate, their faces difficult to interpret. A senior counsel, Mark Levin, repeatedly posed the same inquiry. How did this oversight occur? No one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The numerous transfers of ownership involving various parent companies and banks had obscured the documentation until Morris brought it back to their attention. There's a public title gap, Gerald stated. No signed release, no recorded sale. The reversion clause was never satisfied. Mark Levin moved closer to the screen. Does this man, Langston, possess the original documents? John stated that he has more than just documents. He has lineage, and we verified the parcel data. It's the same land. The only alterations were the asphalt and steel constructed upon it. Mark pinched his nose. Okay, here's what we need. Secure a release from this man. Offer a small settlement. Remove him from the building before the press arrives. Maurice, seated quietly nearby, understood their thinking without needing to hear the discussion. He understood the atmosphere. After decades of observing how people assess your value, John ended the call and turned to him. Mr. Langston, would you be willing to settle this today? We could quietly arrange compensation, something equitable. Morris folded his arms. What's fair to you? John paused. That would require negotiation. But if we act quickly, we could avoid unwanted publicity. Maurice chuckled softly. Unwanted by whom? John momentarily looked surprised. A knock sounded at the glass door. A woman, identifiable by the local news logo on her lanyard, smiled and raised her phone. Hello. We've received information that someone entered with a land deed asserting ownership of the bank property. May we speak with Mr. Langston? John's face visibly drained. Who informed you? A voice from the lobby murmured. The live streams have exceeded 12,000 viewers. Morris rose to his feet deliberately. There's nothing to be concerned about. I'm not intending to cause a disturbance. Gerald approached. Mr. Langston, please understand that this situation requires careful handling. It would benefit everyone involved if we could maintain discretion. I attempted a subtle approach, Maurice stated. I'm accustomed to quiet. It defined much of my existence. It yielded no progress. A pause settled over the group. Gerald seemed poised to object, but a palpable truth lingered, inescapable. Returning to the lobby, Brittany spoke softly to Maurice. The amusement had vanished from her face. Do you truly possess this? She inquired. I have always possessed it, he replied. The recollection seemed to simply vanish. She lowered her gaze, a hint of embarrassment visible. I'm sorry. Morris's expression eased a little. It's not your fault. You were instructed on how to behave when someone like me enters. The bank's doors opened once more, and 2 additional reporters entered. A man carried a boom microphone over his shoulder. Another began recording with his phone. Cliff attempted to block their entry. This is private property. A reporter responded, observing Maurice. Not for long. As inquiries began from the media, Maurice did not seek attention. He instead glanced back at the familiar envelope he held, the one that held his family's history across generations, and understood it was time for the world to know it. Maurice needed no microphone. He needed no formal announcement. He simply needed to remain where he was. That was sufficient. A reporter, a woman in her 40s named Kimber Rowland from WBR, approached. Mr. Langston, could you verify that you assert ownership of the land the bank occupies? Maurice met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not asserting anything, he stated. I'm presenting facts, and the document in my hand demonstrates what none of you ever took the time to investigate. Kimber nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the significance in his tone. What outcome are you pursuing with this? Maurice didn't respond immediately. He turned to address the increasingly large gathering. There were customers, employees, and security present, with some people watching from the sidewalk. What I'm hoping for, he said finally, is that the next time someone walks in looking like I do, maybe people won't react with amusement first. The silence that followed was palpable. The young man who had been laughing earlier near the coffee machine suddenly looked down at his shoes. Brittany tightened her grip on her ID badge and avoided his gaze. Cliff shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. Look, Sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. You need to comprehend. We simply weren't prepared. There was laughter. Maurice intervened. You all responded that way. The moment I entered the room, you observed my coat, my shoes, the discoloration on my hands, and you determined I was insignificant. No one spoke. Have you ever considered how many people you're likely to dismiss each day? Moving around here as if you possess all the knowledge, as if you've already assessed someone's narrative merely by viewing their exterior. John Delgado moved ahead, attempting to redirect the situation. Mr. Langston, we are ready to offer a formal apology and begin settlement negotiations. Maurice gave him a drawn-out, weary look. Do you still believe this concerns finances? A teenager with a camera phone murmured to his friend, out of view of the reporters, Dude, this person is really committed. Observe the documents. Kimber, perceiving something more significant, inquired, Where have you been until now? What prompted you to come forward at this time? Maurice sighed, not in annoyance, simply in contemplation. Following my dad's passing, I lost interest in matters of this nature. I was preoccupied with basic survival, taking on sporadic jobs like roofing, welding, and janitorial work whenever available. Maintaining stable housing proved difficult when people avoided direct interaction. I experienced periods of both prosperity and hardship, followed by even more challenging times. He paused. There were nights I slept under bridges and mornings I cleaned the same floors people used to ignore me. However, I never discarded that envelope. The memory of every shelter I stayed in, every town I passed through, remained with me. He held it up gently. It's all I had left from a man who believed we were worth more than people thought. And one day, I simply grew weary of silence. A woman from the crowd spoke softly. You kept the deed all these years? Maurice nodded. 50 years it stayed in our family. Passed from one calloused hand to another, Kimber asked. And what now? He surveyed the bank lobby, his gaze lingering on each employee who had assessed him that morning. What now? He repeated. Now you recall my name. From a corner location, Gerald spoke to John. This is going to be a public relations disaster. However, the individuals within the bank weren't observing Gerald. They were observing Maurice. Truly observing. Some for the first time, as if a barrier had been removed. Not just from his narrative, but from theirs as well. You believe I was unseen? Maurice stated softly. I remained present. You simply didn't observe carefully enough. However, the outside world had already begun to notice. They perceived a man who brought more than just a deed to that building. He carried evidence that dignity isn't derived from affluence. It arises from steadfastly maintaining one's identity. By the following morning, the narrative had spread beyond state lines. Every local news station in Tennessee aired a rendition of it. Some reported inaccuracies. A report suggested Maurice had assumed control of the bank, a claim that proved false. Nevertheless, the message spread. Residents of Blount County, particularly older individuals, began searching through attics and storage boxes, questioning what they might have overlooked. College students shared excerpts online with accompanying text, such as this exemplifies generational theft. To them, Maurice wasn't a news item. He represented an alert and a sign. At the bank, the situation quickly worsened. Legal representatives from the corporation arrived from elsewhere. Security personnel were now joined by local police officers patrolling the parking lot, employed for crowd management. Demonstrators had assembled along the sidewalk, displaying cardboard signs. Their messages included phrases like respect land rights. Not just a deed, a legacy. He was right all along. Maurice hadn't organized the gathering, nor had he requested anyone to attend, yet they came. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Tisdale was pacing once more, his face flushed as he managed calls from corporate and press liaisons. John Delgado was in his office, with the blinds completely shut, feeling the burden of everything. Maurice was in the break room, drinking coffee from paper cup. Never thought I'd be allowed in here, he remarked, mostly to himself. Kimber Rowland had returned, and her camera crew was filming quietly from the parking lot. She wasn't trying to create problems. She was simply waiting for the story to unfold. That afternoon, a legal representative, Clay Addison, entered the bank. He possessed a clean-shaven appearance, a southern drawl, and wore a silk tie that appeared more valuable than Morris's entire wardrobe. He did not offer a smile. "Mr. Langston," Clay began, settling across from him, "let me start by saying our firm recognizes the validity of your documentation. We are here to discuss terms." Maurice listened intently, remaining still. "You placed our client in a complex situation. We acknowledge the oversight and are ready to present a substantial financial offer for the permanent transfer of ownership." A paper was slid across the table by Clay. Maurice looked at it, then raised his gaze. "You believe this is the core issue?" he inquired, his voice level. "It's a considerable sum," Clay stated. "It's a price," Maurice replied, "and it doesn't come close to covering what you're attempting to resolve." Clay released a sharp breath. "What would be acceptable to you?" Maurice leaned forward, composed but resolute. "I want a plaque with my grandfather's name displayed out front. I also want the official record corrected with the city, and I want a foundation established in his name, one that provides housing for families who have experienced similar circumstances." Clay blinked. "Are you serious?" "I'm absolutely serious." There was a significant pause. Then Clay said, "I will present this to the board." "You please do that." Information about the negotiation became public the same day. And when it did, an unforeseen development occurred. People began making donations. People donated online, in person, and by check. One woman from Jackson traveled 2 hours to personally hand Maurice a $20 bill and express her gratitude for him, ensuring they weren't forgotten. The bank subsequently released a brief statement later that week, stating, "We recognize the validity of Mr. Maurice Langston's claim and are working in good faith to resolve this matter respectfully. We have deep appreciation for the legacy of Franklin Delroy and the community he helped build." While corporate and sanitized, this statement was unexpected. Regarding Maurice, there was no celebration. No press conference was held. He simply exited the bank one afternoon, carrying the same envelope he had entered with. However, this time he wasn't alone. 3 generations of Delroys stood with him in spirit, and hundreds more supported them. While legal teams assessed expenses and public relations teams prepared announcements, the most important aspect had already transpired. Someone like Maurice had finally been acknowledged, and the narrative was no longer controlled by the bank. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten. The sun shone that morning. Maurice Langston stood in front of the bank again. Now, he wasn't standing on disputed land. He was standing on his grandfather's land, officially recognized by the city of Knoxville as part of the Franklin Delroy Legacy Trust. It wasn't just a name on paper anymore. A new plaque had been installed outside the bank's main entrance, embedded in a small brick pedestal near the sidewalk. Bronze letters, clear and lasting. Dedicated to Franklin Delroy, 1890 to 1954, builder, father, landowner. His legacy endures. Maurice touched it softly. The plaque felt cool beneath his fingertips. He remained silent. Words weren't necessary. A small group had assembled for the unveiling. Community leaders, students from the local university, reporters, and some of the same bank staff who previously ridiculed him were present. Brittany stood at the rear, her hands clasped, attempting to make eye contact with Maurice whenever he turned. This time he succeeded. The foundation he had proposed was already being established. A partnership with a local nonprofit was formed within weeks of the settlement. The Delroy Housing Fund would provide grants to families at risk of homelessness, particularly those who have been disadvantaged by legal complexities and overlooked actions. "I didn't desire revenge," Maurice told Kimber Rowland in his final interview. "I simply wanted the truth to endure beyond the falsehood." It had taken years to reach this point. For years, he had experienced being overlooked, marginalized, and disregarded. However, the instant he entered through those glass doors, holding a creased envelope and a legacy of suffering, things began to shift. And currently, he was simply a man identified by a name. He had acquired a modest, well-kept house not distant from the outskirts of Alcoa, close to the same areas where his father had previously constructed porches and fences. It wasn't elaborate, merely a neat area, a functional sink, a bed to relax in. Occasionally, he would sit on a plastic chair outside, sipping coffee and greeting children cycling up the slope. On other occasions, he collaborated with local high schools, discussing land ownership, family histories, and the consequences of oblivion with students. Preserve your documents, he advised them. Retain your names. Ensure no one erases your people from the narrative. People now referred to him as Mr. Langston. At times, even Sir, but the designation he valued most was the one his grandfather had attained. Builder. It wasn't about buildings, but about something larger. Legacy. He never anticipated forgiveness from the bank. However, it wasn't necessary. What he required, he received: an acknowledgement, a correction, and the opportunity for those who followed to declare, "I belong here too." The bank continued its operations, but the employees carried themselves differently. They engaged with people they had previously overlooked. They posed questions rather than making assumptions. The transformation wasn't flawless, but it represented a meaningful shift. One afternoon, several months following the resolution of events, Brittany approached him outside the community center. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice betraying nervousness. "Yes," he replied. I've been taking night classes. Real estate law." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he inquired. "After everything that happened, I realized how much I didn't know. About ownership, history, how things get passed down or lost." Morris smiled, slow and genuine. "Good for you." She paused. "I'm sorry for how I treated you that first day." He nodded. An apology wasn't necessary. It was owed to the individual who would next enter. She considered this thoughtfully, responding, "Yes, I will." He retrieved a copy of the original deed, a replica, to be exact, from his coat, and gave it to her. "Keep this. Use it in class. Teach someone something." She accepted it with care, as if it were fragile. As she departed, Morris looked towards the street and observed a group of teenagers assembling at the bus stop across the road. One of them gestured towards the plaque. The others drew closer to listen. He remained silent, allowing them to continue. He simply observed, a quiet sense of pride welling up within him as his grandfather's name emerged in the discussion once more. Perhaps that's how genuine transformation truly begins. Not through rage, nor solely through the pursuit of justice, but through remembrance and the bravery to keep it alive. Should you experience a feeling while hearing Morris's narrative, do not hold it back. Spread it. Discuss it. And if there's a family name you haven't mentioned in some time, vocalize it. The impact of legacies endures only when we actively preserve them. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the true meaning of dignity.